Hey there, everyone. So, amidst the current stage of the Israel-Palestine conflict, one of the groups that is figured fairly prominently in political media, but is generally misunderstood, is Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Lebanese Shia Islamist political party and militant group. They were founded in 1985 and since 1992 has been led by Hassan Nasrallah. And as crazy as it may sound, Hezbollah is a political party. And while they do have a military wing which is engaged in anti-colonial struggles, they do have official status in the Lebanese parliament. And part of the reason I wanted to make this is so that we could look at Hezbollah's program, where they establish what are their goals, what are they trying to fight, what are they rallying around, in order to understand their role in modern anti-colonial movements. Now, one of the issues keeping Hezbollah from being understood in a more nuanced way is there is a Western tendency to look at any organization or movement associated with Islam and assume it is a terrorist organization. And considering the ubiquity of the term terrorism, this is generally an unhelpful term for understanding politics in the Middle East, because it's very easy to consider any violence of any kind today terrorism, especially because of the shift away from more conventional terms to describe war towards more guerrilla styles of warfare, meaning that today warfare takes place on a smaller scale, likely because most of the kind of conventional warfare techniques today would lead to military war and thus to nuclear war and thus to imminent world collapse. So, wars are usually taking place in kind of more small-scale organizational methods than countrywide, like World War I, World War II kind of oppositions. And Hezbollah, being Shia, is naturally opposed by a lot of the typical terrorist organizations that the U.S. knows and loves. Ha ha ha. Many of these one may know: Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, or ISIL, ISIS, also Al-Nusra in Syria. All of these groups oppose Hezbollah, and that's important, because it's easy to see all of these Islamist organizations and movements as a combined front from a Western perspective, but they're just not. Partly because Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and Al-Nusra, these are all concerned with establishing a worldwide caliphate, meaning a worldwide theocracy under Sharia. And this is not what Hezbollah is doing. Hezbollah is concerned with a Lebanese nationalist movement opposing U.S. colonialism/imperialism in particular. And Lebanon has had a long history of colonialism. It was abdicated to the French when the Middle East was kind of cut up in the early 20th century around the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And they have since become mostly under U.S. imperial influence. This is kind of the case for the entirety of the Middle East. So Hezbollah is concerned with establishing a unified front to oppose U.S. imperial interests under an Islamic structure. And we can see right off the top that Hezbollah means the party of God, Hizb and Allah. And they are kind of building off of the Iranian Revolution of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and they're trying to fight against a number of things. We can see quite clearly here their alliance, that they declare openly and loudly that they are the Ummah, meaning the This can mean the Muslim community, this can mean the world. It has a lot of different meanings. And they are, of course, a God-fearing organization, so it does have a theological aspect to it. And they are opposed to injustice, aggression, and humiliation. And one of the things that defines Hezbollah's political program is they do not advocate for offensive jihad generally. Now, offensive jihad would say that it is the Muslim Ummah's duty to destroy all non-believers actively through aggressive campaigns. Now, Hezbollah is a little bit more defensive. For Hezbollah, jihad is oriented around getting rid of aggressors and trying to maintain a stable community rather than actively contributing to creating new conflicts. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that Hezbollah just sits back and does nothing. They are very active militarily, primarily against Israel and the U.S., and this is in order to go against what they see as aggressors in their land. And they're particularly against America here, and Zionism in particular, which has, of course, established a land in the place of Palestine and has continued to aggress in that area. And you can see here that they have a very marked opposition to the U.S., saying that they won't be misled, that the whole world knows that whoever wishes to oppose the U.S., that arrogant superpower, cannot indulge in marginal acts which may make it deviate from its major objective. We combat abomination, and we shall tear out its very roots, its primary roots, which are the U.S. And it must be acknowledged that there is some truth to this statement. A lot of the struggles that have led to suffering in the Middle East are the U.S. is doing. For example, funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which led to Al-Qaeda and led to 9/11. So, the U.S. has definitely continually intervened in the Middle East. I also think of the war in Iraq. And there's this constant need to have some puppet presence in the Middle East. And this has primarily been through the existence and the continued funding of the State of Israel. The State of Israel receives the most foreign aid of any U.S. decision to this day. You can see quite clearly there is a lot of U.S. opposition. This is why we are here more and more in a state of permanent alert in order to repel aggression and defend our religion, our existence, our dignity. So we can see that defensive attitude more so than the offensive prevailing here. They cite invasion, destroying villages, all of these massacres against the Ummah, and are trying to align themselves as being opposed to U.S. aggression in the Middle East. And you can see that they list here certain aggression in Lebanon on behalf of Israel, for example, and as well as Muslims having to leave their homes in Palestine. And Hezbollah has repeatedly established a political alliance with the PLO. They're currently aligned with Hamas, and they use these military oppositions to the Palestinians' well-being as justification for their political existence. And this right here sums up quite well Hezbollah's kind of response when it comes to violence, because this is one of the most controversial aspects of anti-colonial movements. It is a fact that colonialism has wreaked havoc on the world. And in order to get out from under colonial oppression, this necessarily means that sometimes force will be necessary. And Hezbollah states here, "Our people could not bear any more treachery. It decided to oppose infidelity, be it French, American, or Israeli, by striking at their headquarters and launching a veritable war of resistance against the occupation forces." So war of resistance against occupation forces quite well sums up what Hezbollah's project is. They will actively endorse Hamas and oppose Israel militarily in order to strike out Israel's existence as an occupier in Palestine. Once again, they give us their enemies here, the Phalanges, Israel, France, and the US. And when one reads this three-part objective, we see that Hezbollah is really not that extreme. Their first objective is to dispel the Americans and French, getting rid of the colonial presence in Lebanon. That is fair. If the U.S. is going to speak about national self-determination, then they ought to uphold that and let Lebanon decide for themselves. The second is to submit the Phalanges to just power and bring them all to justice for the crimes they have perpetrated against Muslims and Christians. So they are trying to, work on their own internal affairs of going against a party that they disagree with. And third is to permit all the sons of our people to determine their future and to choose in all the liberty the form of government they desire. So that's self-determination right there. We call upon all of them to pick the option of Islamic government, which alone is capable of guaranteeing justice and liberty for all. Only an Islamic regime can stop any further tentative attempts of imperialistic infiltration into our country. So important to note here is that choice is number one here, and then Islamic government is recommended, and they tell people that they should choose this option of government, which, they're entitled to their own political and religious opinions for what they think is a proper form of organization. And the reason that they want an Islamic regime, which namely is not the Khilafah, not the Caliphate, is to stop imperialistic infiltration into the country. So it's explicitly stated in nationalistic terms of defense. And importantly, their response to religion is rather different from Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra, for example. They state, we want all the oppressed to be able to study the divine message in order to bring justice, peace, and tranquility to the world. So, right, they have their program for what they think is going to bring the best peace to their land. And then they continue, this is why we don't want to impose Islam upon anybody, as much as we that others impose upon us their convictions and their political systems. We don't want Islam to reign in Lebanon by force, as is the case with the Maronites today. This is the minimum that we can accept in order to be able to accede by legal means to realize our ambitions, to save Lebanon from its dependence upon East and West, to put an end to foreign occupation, and to adopt a regime freely wanted by the people of Lebanon. So they're offering their political program of, an Islamic regime, but they are stating quite clearly that they will not force this on people. Now, we can talk about words versus actions, and I think that is important to consider in the political program of, it's easy to say something like national self-determination for the U.S., for example, and then for the U.S. to violate that. But it is important to just look at what do they actually want to say, because most people will never even look at Hezbollah and see what they have to say. And they're not terribly reformist here. They state here that all opposition in Lebanon voiced in the name of reform can only profit, ultimately, the present system. So they want a radical change like with the Iranian Revolution, for example, in 1979 with Ayatollah Khomeini. And this little section to the Christians is quite interesting because, of course, this is basically just a reaching out to say, well, Islam is best for you. They're calling for them to listen to dawah. But they say here, for those of you who are peaceful, continue to live in our midst without anybody even thinking to trouble you. So they make very clear, and this is, there's a long history of tolerance in Islam. And there's varying, readings of the Quran, for example, but it is generally agreed upon by kind of more liberally minded scholars that provided that there is a peaceful coexistence and probably also non-Muslims paying the jizya, which is a tax for non-Muslims, then there can be a peaceful pact. I suggest reading Surah At-Taba, Surah 9 in the Quran, to kind of see some precedent in the Quran for this, see what you think. I'm not a Muslim myself, so I'm not like advocating it. I'm just saying, you can read and learn about it. And then in terms of some of their political alliances, they reject both the USSR and the US, both capitalism and communism. So they kind of want to go for a third solution here. And they also reject UNIFIL, which is a United Nations intervention in Lebanon, which they see as unjust. Now, this last part on the necessity for the destruction of Israel is perhaps one of the most important spots in this program for understanding Hezbollah's involvement with the Israel-Palestine conflict today. Now, they state rather clearly that we see in Israel the vanguard of the United States in our Islamic world. This is undeniably true. The U.S. is one of Israel's largest allies. They give them the largest amount of foreign aid assistance and weapons technologies and whatnot. It is undeniable that even from the U.S. foreign policy perspective, Israel is their vanguard state, their puppet state in the Middle East to kind of control the affairs of other states in the Middle East. They continue that it is the hated enemy that must be fought until the hated ones get what they deserve. This enemy is the greatest danger to our future generations and to the destiny of our lands, particularly as it glorifies the ideas of settlement and expansion initiated in Palestine and yearning outward to the extension of the great Israel from the Euphrates to the Nile. And it's important to note here that they are not opposed to Jewish people. This is not a form of anti-Semitism. This is explicitly against the Zionist occupation of Palestine. It is about Zionism, the idea that Palestine is not for Palestinians, but that it can be overwritten and serve as a holy land for the Jewish people. And the reason they don't like that is because it glorifies the ideas of settlement and expansion. In other words, it is the modern incarnation of imperialism, and it needs to be stopped primarily because of this allyship with U.S. imperialism today. And they state, our primary assumption in our fight against Israel states that the Zionist entity, so this is different than Jews, this is the Zionist entity, so the state of Israel, the political fact of Israel, is aggressive from its inception and built on lands wrested from their owners at the expense of the rights of the Muslim people. So they are stating quite clearly the existence of Israel is built on the precedents of violence and aggression from its inception aimed at stealing land from another people, namely the Palestinians. Therefore, our struggle will end only when this entity is obliterated. Entity. So again, not the Jewish people, but the state of Israel as a sovereign political voice. We recognize no treaty with it, no ceasefire, and no peace agreements, whether separate or consolidated. And they say, that might sound strange, but they condemn all of this because they don't want to give any recognition or legitimacy to the state of Israel. They are, aligned with Palestine, and they won't acknowledge any of the peace agreements, for example, that tried to cut up Palestine because they see all of them as illegitimate. So I hope this has helped understand Hezbollah a little bit, understand some of the anti-colonial movements taking place in the Middle East, some of the main concerns in the Middle East, so that at least one can be informed about the political milieu of the Middle East and hopefully be able to make a more informed decision about what it means to stand in solidarity with Palestine, for example, or Hezbollah. I mean, look, I'm not a Muslim, so I'm not necessarily aligned with Hezbollah insofar as their Islamic regime is concerned. But in terms of their anti-colonial movement, I think it is based in facts, and I think that it is something that one should be supporting. So check out any of my other lectures that I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, other literature. Become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom that you can tailor to your needs. That's it, and I'll see you in another lecture.